So what I wanted to talk about tonight is happiness. Happiness in general, and also the happiness that comes from this practice. And I think that's an extremely worthy topic, because I know in my own life how much harm I've created, or a mess of my life I've created in this pursuit of happiness. And I vividly remember, like, happiness, this topic of happiness, came up in the very first Dharma talk I ever went to. So early in my practice, my first teacher, Claude Anshin Thomas, I love the guy, but he didn't give many Dharma talks. It was like years before I actually heard like one of these types of Dharma talks. Because what he would do, he would just do Q&As, and that's it. If nobody has any questions, nothing more to be addressed. And that was until he was invited to give a talk at a local yoga studio in my hometown. So it was like kind of like a big event, seeing my teacher give like an official talk. And so I was excited. So I go to this yoga studio to see my beloved teacher give a talk for the first time. And yeah, Claude Anshin, if you know the guy, he can really express himself beautifully. So what he did was really just gave his story. And he has a beautiful story, and he talked about like his upbringing, his conditioning, what led him, all the pains, the sorrows, the traumas that led him into the Dharma, and his life as a Buddhist monk currently in the Dharma. An amazing story. And so after his talk, he opened it up to the audience and for a classic Q&A. And somebody raised their hand, first person raised their hand, and they said, "Oh, that was an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. But are you happy?" Like, this person expected like the happy ending. So, "Are you happy?" And my teacher said, "I don't concern myself with happiness. Next question." And I was like, what? He doesn't concern himself with happiness? Doesn't everybody concern themselves with happiness? Isn't like happiness the most important thing? And this guy I like look up to doesn't concern himself with happiness? And something hit me though, in like that moment where it was like, maybe he's onto something. And I started taking on this kind of perspective of like not really concerning myself with happiness. And that really gave me some space, and ultimately, guess what it did? Made me pretty happy. And so tonight, I do want to talk about this space that happened in my life where it was like this, like, okay, I didn't concern myself with happiness, but I'm going to be real, happiness came to me through the practice. So I want to talk about some of the specific ways where happiness came to me rather than me chasing down happiness. So 3 specific ways I want to talk about happiness in the practice, some of the things that have stood out to me in my own development of my personal security and well-being. The first part I want to go over is kind of like normie happiness, the average way we view happiness, which is through sensual pleasure, which is a goofy way of saying through consumption. Consuming things makes us happy. So I want to talk about that, just to honor that. But I also want to talk about the second way that we can develop happiness within this practice, and it's through ethical behavior. So I want to go over that in a few ways. And then the third way I'm going to look at this is this, like, really, this ultimately landing in the wisdom that comes from Buddhist practice that really supports this inner well-being and happiness. Okay? So first things first, looking at where we normally know happiness. Like I said, sensual pleasure through consumption, through the senses, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, right? And in all the ways that brings about a blip of pleasure and a blip of emotional happiness. All the ways that we can go, see a great movie. Oh yeah, and that brings a little sense of happiness. Or we can eat some good food, or go on a vacation, or have a good conversation, right? Oh yeah, that does bring happiness. And I want to totally honor that. Because sometimes I feel like in spiritual circles, that type of happiness gets kind of dissed on. Like there's like this pretentiousness of I'm better than watching a TV show. Not me. Like after a long week of work, I sit on my couch, I got my dog next to me, I got my wife next to me, and I turn on, I'm watching Big Brother. I don't know if anybody watches Big Brother. I watch Big Brother. Yeah, in that moment, I'm happy. And that's okay. Because I do know, because the trick is, it is impermanent. It will change. The TV show will run out, whatever food I'm eating is going to run out. You know, my dog and my wife, we will be separated, whether that's just for a moment or ultimately. Yeah, I do know these things. And having deep gratitude for my awesome life is part of the practice, right? So, like I said, sometimes spiritual circles kind of diss on this. And the Buddha was not separate from that. The Buddha, his first spiritual community, if y'all know, dissed on pleasure. They said, you know, eating food, that's sinful. You know, sleeping in, that's bad. That's wrong. That's the cause of suffering. That pleasure is the cause of suffering. And so Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, took on that belief. And he damn near died. He like starved himself. And they say you could see his backbone through his stomach because he got so skinny because he believed that pleasure was the cause of his suffering. And what he discovered was, that's not true. What he discovered was this middle way, this middle path, that we're in between these two dead ends, that we don't want to fall into the dead end of addiction to pleasure. And that's true, definitely. But we also don't want to fall into the anorexia of life, the addiction to self-punishment sometimes, denying pleasure. That's inevitable in life. And so what we want to do is rest in this equanimous state of being in the middle of life. And some of that includes, yeah, pleasure makes me happy. And that's okay. It can't make me the ultimate happiness. It may be a lesser happiness, but it still makes me happy. And so, as I go into normie happiness, let's step into a little bit of a deeper degree. And as I go through these explanations, it will be more and more mature in the progress of happiness. So the second way that I found some happiness in my life was stepping into ethical behavior, what we call sila, S-I-L-A, in Buddhist practice, sila. That we take on things like the 5 precepts. And initially, these 5 precepts are settling into the intention of non-harming. That's like bare bones ethical practice that will lead you to some more happiness. Just non-harming. That we open up to the vulnerability of life, the susceptibility of harm that is in this world. And we open our hearts to that and realize that I don't want to hurt other people anymore. And so we commit to these 5 precepts. 5 precepts of not killing. That's something we commit to. Not stealing. That's something we commit to. Not lying. Not being harmful with our sexual behavior. And not taking intoxicants. Those are the 5 things that we commit to. And it's an exploration, like I said, these invitations that we get in this practice. This isn't a pass-fail scenario. These are meditation practices that we take on with this heart and intention of non-harming. And so whatever way that shows up for you, there's like the saying that self-esteem is built by doing esteemable acts. So it's quite esteemable to watch the way you speak with people, to renounce gossip, to stray away from intentionally hurting people. And when we do that, it generally brings up a little self-esteem. And renouncing these different things. I know in my own life, when I quit eating meat, well, that made me feel really good. Good about myself. The renouncing of that. When I quit drinking, That made me really good about myself. When I quit smoking cigarettes, well, that made me feel really good about myself. And so this is the joy. Sometimes we say the joy of renunciation. Because sometimes we think like giving up stuff, it's like, oh, that sucks, I have to give up smoking. That's the wrong attitude. Renunciation is like, oh, I'm free from smoking. And it's like even checking in with yourself right now, like what are you bound by and addicted to right now that you're like, wouldn't it be so fucking awesome if I was free? And if you commit to that, and it does take work for some things, but when you get to that point where you're like, I don't do that anymore, it feels really good. And so in the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, if by renouncing a lesser happiness one may realize a greater happiness, let the wise one renounce the lesser and have regard for the greater. We give up these lesser happiness to go for the greater happiness. There is a higher happiness that comes from letting go of the things that, a cigarette can give me a little bit of pleasure, but damn, does it feel good to be like, I don't smoke anymore, right? And so not only going into this non-harming, but also something that may happen is when we practice our ethical practices, we step into this renowned virtue, for lack of a better term, dana here, D-A-N-A. And dana is loosely translated to generosity. And so we want to be generous with our actions. And so we take on these precepts not only with the negation, but also with the positive. And so when we look at harsh speech, we're using that as an example, exploring this harsh speech, that we do want to renounce things like talking shit about people, right? Or telling somebody to fuck off, or, flicking people off when you're driving around in your car. That stuff, yeah, it feels good for a second, but, give it a little bit and you'll feel kind of crappy about it. Yeah, give that up, but now what? Where's the generosity in this? Well, now it's like, oh, can I be generous with my speech? Can I intentionally call somebody up and say, hey, I'm thinking about you, right? Or when somebody's having a hard time, just be like, hey, I'm right here for you, sticking around after the meditation to just have a talk with somebody. That is a generous act. That's an act of dana that we say here. And so acting in generous, ethical ways, I think is a way that really cultivates a lot of great happiness. And then the third way I want to look at this ethical practice, not only, renouncing harmful behavior and lifting up pro-social behavior, what I want to look at too is our ethics of the mind. What are we doing inside of ourselves? Because that can dictate a lot of our suffering or happiness. And so, keep an eye on your mind. What are your ethics in your mind? When we are internally, intentionally talking shit about somebody within our own mind. You do that from time to time? I know I have. It makes me depressed. It makes me not trust people. It doesn't make me happy. But for some reason, somewhere along the line, I thought, hey, that person I don't agree with politically, I can just mentally say how bad they are and how ugly they are and how stupid they are over and over and over again in my mind and really think that's going to be something good within me. And so that's the renunciation, to be like, no, cut it out. When you find yourself intentionally thinking thoughts that are harmful to another person, cut it out. Stop. Just be like, nope, mind, we don't do that in here. Nope, that's not how we talk to ourselves. That's not how we talk about other people. Nope. I even said ourselves too. How many times do we just mentally attack ourselves too? Oh, I don't look the way I want to look. Or oh, I don't have the job I want, and I suck because of that. It's like, nope, we don't do that in here. Cut it out. Let's stop. And that's ethics of the mind. Stop. And so there are methods of doing this too. That I do want to be merciful. That the mind does say terrible things. But that's just the mind thinking. But notice when you're intentionally thinking. You notice there's certain thoughts you can think on purpose, and there's other thoughts that just think themselves. Those thoughts that think themselves and say rude things about people and rude things about yourself, oh yeah, that's a thought. That's okay. But the intentional, don't do that anymore. Cut it out. And then also, like I said, this generosity. Think nice things about people. You don't have to tell them. Just thinking nice things about people, even right now. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm really glad everybody's here thinking these things. Oh, like it feels really good to be in a group of people that are into the same things that I'm into. Yeah, and thinking, this person's my friend. Oh, I hope this person has a lovely evening. Intentionally thinking these things, because that will equal happiness, I guarantee. And over time, that just becomes the natural inclination of the mind. So, to review, as we're like building blocks to a great spiritual happiness, right? We started with normie happiness, as I called it, consumption-based happiness. Awesome, I'm not going to diss on that, right? But then we take it a little bit further with ethical practices, the ethics of non-harming in our physical behavior, the ethics of being generous in our behaviors, but also the ethics of the mind, keeping an eye on our minds. And then now I want to step into the deeper wisdom, the wisdom that we cultivate in these practices that leads us to the highest happiness. And so in Buddhist practice, we generally start with this word dukkha. Y'all know dukkha? Probably on a very personal level. So dukkha is loosely translated to a whole bunch of things. You know, so many Dharma teachers get up here and argue about that word. What does it mean? But you know it when you see it, right? Dukkha is the unsatisfying quality of life, that all conditions are impermanent, life is fucking painful, there's aging, there's sickness, there's death, there's sorrow, there's lamentation, there's grief, despair. You're separated from everything you hold dear, and you'll be in company of things you don't like all that much. It's kind of ingrained in being a human. It's going to happen to all of us. How does acknowledging that lead to happiness? That life is ultimately unsatisfying? Life in and of itself is unsatisfying? How the hell is that supposed to make me happy? So I got an example. Last week I was meditating. I love my meditations. But a thought arose in my mind. And so this thought was about work. And this is what I do for work, right? I oftentimes go into treatment centers and work very intimately with people. And I care very much about these people that I work with. And so I was opening to a Q&A, and somebody asked a question, and we're exploring it. I didn't really understand the question, and I gave an answer that I wasn't really satisfied with. And then the next day I sit and meditate, and then I think about this person that said that question, and then I was like, oh, I totally answered that wrong. I didn't answer that right. Let me think about how I'm going to get this answer right. And then, oh, that's dukkha. Oh, what am I doing here? Planning what I'm going to say to this person that's in my mind right now. It's dukkha. There will never be the correct answer to that. That's already done. It's unsatisfying. And that's okay. It's okay that I don't have to be perfect at my job. I will never be perfect at my job. Actually, nothing will be perfect. There will always be the answers that fall flat. There will always be the scenarios that don't work out. That's dukkha. And when I'm sitting in meditation ruminating about an answer I gave at work, I go, oh yeah, that's dukkha. And I smiled at dukkha, and I was like, oh, the Buddha was right all this time. And I came back to my meditation. And that's the relief we get. It's like a permission. Life doesn't have to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. Give up. It's okay. Things don't work out. And so that's the relief we get when we acknowledge the permanent nature of life, the imperfect nature of life, and the impersonal nature of life. Sometimes Buddhism gets this gloom and doom reputation. Why are we looking at dukkha? Why are we looking at impermanence? Why are we looking at death? Why are we looking at these painful feelings? Because ultimately, if you keep going, it will make you happy. Because what we discover is what actually is a reliable source of happiness. Life itself is not a reliable source of happiness. It's our own cultivation and relationship to life that is a reliable source of happiness. And so happiness is an inside job. I'm acknowledging that this may be dukkha, but I'm thinking of an analogy here. A cupcake, right? How do you feel about cupcakes? Oh, I love cupcakes, right? Actually, you don't love the cupcake. You love the way the cupcake makes you feel, and you have a conditioned response to lean in towards cupcake because you went through a scenario, probably numerous times in your life, you ate a cupcake, it was sweet, it was pleasant, and now your mind says, I love cupcake, right? And so this is that conditioned response. Pleasure, like cupcake, assigned as the object of that pleasure, I love cupcake. So, what about painful things? And so this is the practice where we can, love cupcake. Great, like I said before, love the cupcake, but also, what about painful experiences? What about, another day of work. I don't want to go to work tomorrow. I got to deal with that person that always asks me that question over and over and over again. Is there love in that moment? Or is the love gone? And this is where our power is. It's like everything's on a chain of change and accept. Change and accept, change and accept. We accept that there's dukkha. But what can we change? Where's our own volition? Is our relationship. And so as the pain arises, can we develop a conditioned response to love pain? And when we develop a conditioned response, we start seeing our power in this to love pain. And loving pain is what the Buddha called compassion. It's not, I enjoy pain. It's, I see here that I can say, oh, sweet baby, another day at work, I'll love you through this. I got your back. If it's hard, I'll be right here for you. And the more we speak to ourselves in that way, we develop a deeper sense of happiness. Unconditional happiness. Because the conditions of the world are unreliable by nature. And so, when we find that happiness within, pleasure arises. I can bring love in this heart with the pleasure without driving into attachment. And then pain arises. I know what to do here. To love myself with the pain. Be nurturing and caring with the pain. And that's where the happiness happens. There is a happiness not born of this world. Another lovely teacher of mine, the Venerable Panyawati, would always say, there's a happiness not born of this world. And when you find that happiness not born of this world, that means the world can't take it away. And so, this is where peace comes in. Peace or equanimity. And this is the Buddha's expression of what the highest happiness is. He says, peace. Peace is the highest happiness. When we find peace with our conflicts, when we find peace with our pleasures, it's unfuckwithable. Yeah. That felt good to get off my chest. Something I very much care about, happiness.
What's up, y'all? Reverend Mikey Noshel here from Wild Heart Meditation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for checking us out. Do me a favor, please like and subscribe. And if you feel moved to leave a donation, you can do so at wildheartmeditationcenter.org or the Venmo link in the description. Peace and love.